What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors confronts one of its most controversial broadcasters about climate activism and celebrity responsibility? In just 20 seconds, a civil conversation transformed into one of the most explosive exits in talk show history. Before we dive into this shocking confrontation, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations the industry doesn't want you to see, and the moments that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling. Last night, on Piers Morgan Uncensored, what started as a discussion about Colin Firth's latest film quickly devolved into a heated battle that left viewers stunned and the show in chaos. The Oscar-winning actor, known for his measured demeanor and thoughtful approach to interviews, found himself in a verbal war with Morgan that nobody saw coming. The tension built slowly at first, like a storm gathering on the horizon, but within 20 minutes, it had erupted into a full-scale confrontation that would dominate headlines and social media for days to come. The conversation began innocently enough. Firth had appeared on the show to promote his new environmental documentary, a passion project years in the making that explored innovative solutions to climate change around the world. He arrived at the studio in good spirits, greeting Morgan with a handshake and settling into the guest chair with the easy confidence of someone who'd done hundreds of interviews before. The studio audience applauded warmly as Morgan introduced him, listing his impressive credentials and Oscar wins. But Morgan, ever the provocateur, wasted no time steering the discussion toward more contentious territory. His opening questions seemed friendly enough, asking about the documentary's locations and most interesting moments. Firth responded enthusiastically, describing fascinating renewable energy projects in Scandinavia and innovative farming techniques in Africa. For the first few minutes, it seemed like it would be a pleasant, informative conversation. Then Morgan's tone shifted. His questions became sharper, more pointed. The smile remained on his face, but there was a predatory gleam in his eyes that anyone who'd watched his show before would recognize. He was setting a trap, and Firth, still in promotional mode, didn't see it coming until it was too late. Within minutes, the tension in the studio was palpable, and what followed would become one of the most talked about moments in recent television history. Morgan leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he addressed his guest. "Colin, let's talk about your new documentary. You're flying around the world, filming in a dozen different countries? And the whole time, you're telling ordinary people they need to cut back on their carbon footprint. Don't you see the hypocrisy in that? Don't you see the problem with jetting around the globe, while lecturing working families about their driving habits?" Firth's expression remained calm, but there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested he'd heard this line of questioning before and found it tiresome. He took a breath before responding. "Actually, Piers, the entire production was carbon neutral. We offset everything, traveled by train whenever possible across Europe, used local crews to minimize transportation, and the whole point of the film is to show solutions, not just problems. We're not lecturing anyone. We're highlighting what's already working in different parts of the world." "Carbon neutral?" Morgan repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, as if they were something distasteful. "That's just buying your way out of guilt, isn't it? Like medieval indulgences. The rich and famous pay their money to some carbon offset scheme, plant a few trees somewhere they'll never see, and get to feel good about themselves, while everyone else suffers the actual consequences." A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they'd been expecting from what was supposed to be a straightforward promotional interview. "That's a rather simplistic way of looking at it," Firth replied, his tone still measured but with an edge creeping in. "We're trying to show that change is possible at every level, from individual choices to corporate responsibility to government policy. It's not about guilt, Piers. It's about responsibility and showing people that they're not powerless in the face of this crisis." Morgan leaned forward now, sensing an opening. "Responsibility? Let me ask you this, Colin. How many homes do you own? I'm genuinely curious. Is it 3? 4? And how many flights did you take last year? Because I'm guessing it's more than the average person takes in a decade, maybe more than they take in a lifetime. The audience was completely silent now, all eyes moving between the two men. Firth's posture had stiffened noticeably. Firth's jaw tightened visibly. He paused for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. I'm not going to apologize for my success, Piers. I've worked hard for everything I have, but I am trying to use whatever platform and resources I have to make a difference. And yes, I'm aware of the contradiction. I'm aware that I benefit from the same systems I'm critiquing. But what exactly are you doing besides tearing down people who are actually trying to help? What's your solution? Just sit back and mock anyone who tries to do something positive? Oh, here we go, Morgan said, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. The celebrity martyr routine. I'm so noble, I'm using my platform for good. You're not helping anyone, Colin. You're not making a real difference. You're making yourself feel better while lecturing working-class people about their lifestyle choices, about their cars, about their holiday flights, while you yourself live a lifestyle they could never dream of. That's not what I'm doing at all. Firth shot back, his voice rising for the first time. The audience could see the actor's famous composure beginning to crack. The documentary specifically focuses on systemic change, on holding corporations and governments accountable, on showing that the biggest polluters are not individual consumers, but massive companies who've spent decades denying and obfuscating the science. But you'd know that if you'd actually watched it, instead of just looking for cheap shots to score points. Morgan's eyes gleamed with something like satisfaction. He loved this. This was the confrontation he'd been angling for from the moment Firth walked into the studio. Cheap shots? I'm asking legitimate questions that your adoring fans in the media won't ask. Questions that ordinary people are thinking when they watch celebrities like you pontificate about the environment. Why should anyone listen to environmental advice from someone who lives in multiple mansions and flies first class everywhere? Because the science doesn't care about my mortgage portfolio? Piers, Firth said, his frustration clearly mounting. Climate change is happening whether you believe it or not, whether I'm perfect or not, whether I live in one house or 10 houses. The data is overwhelming. The evidence is incontrovertible. And frankly, this obsession with individual purity, this constant demand that anyone who speaks about climate change must live like a monk, is exactly the distraction that prevents us from addressing the real issues. The tension in the studio had shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely hostile. Production assistants at the edges of the set were exchanging worried glances, unsure if they should intervene or let it play out. Morgan wasn't backing down. If anything, Firth's emotional response seemed to energize him. So we should just ignore your hypocrisy, because the cause is righteous? That's very convenient for you, isn't it? You get to keep your luxurious lifestyle while feeling morally superior because you made a documentary. That's having your cake and eating it too. It's not hypocrisy to acknowledge a problem while being part of the system, Firth countered, his voice tight with controlled anger. That's called being honest. That's called recognizing that we're all complicit to varying degrees and that the only way forward is to work together to change the system itself. What's your excuse for dismissing the entire crisis? What do you actually believe in besides controversy? Besides just being contrary for the sake of it? I believe in calling out bullshit when I see it, Morgan said, his voice hardening to match Firth's tone. And I see a lot of it coming from Hollywood celebrities who think their fame gives them expertise in everything from foreign policy to climate science to public health. You're actors. You pretend for a living. Why? Should anyone take your opinions seriously? Firth laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. It was a bitter, contemptuous sound. This from a man who built his career on phone hacking scandals and exploiting tragedy for ratings. This from someone who was fired from one job for publishing fake photos and walked away from another in disgrace. Tell me, Piers, What exactly qualifies you to lecture anyone about integrity? What gives you the moral authority to judge others? The temperature in the room had shifted dramatically. This was no longer a debate about climate change or celebrity activism. This had become deeply personal. Morgan's face flushed red, and his casual, smirking demeanor evaporated entirely. Careful, Colin. You might be a beloved actor, but you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about journalism, about holding people accountable, about asking the questions others won't ask. Don't I? Firth leaned forward in his chair, matching Morgan's aggressive posture. His voice dropped to something quieter, but infinitely more cutting. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's talk about a man who positions himself as a voice of the common people while living in an expensive mansion in Kensington. Let's talk about someone who attacks anyone who doesn't agree with him, who makes a living from division and anger, all while hiding behind this transparent facade of brutal honesty and telling it like it is. Morgan's voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. At least, I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't fly around on private jets while telling coal miners they need to find new jobs. I don't live in a bubble of wealth and privilege while acting morally superior to everyone else. I don't make documentaries to soothe my guilty conscience. Jesus Christ, Piers, Firth said, genuine anger breaking through his famous British reserve now. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. You can't actually be this thick. The whole point is that we all need to change. Yes, I have resources. Yes, I've benefited from this system. Yes, my carbon footprint is larger than most people's. That doesn't disqualify me from pointing out that the system is broken. If anything, it obligates me to say something, to use whatever influence I have to push for change. Obligates you? Morgan's voice rose to match Firth's, his face now completely red. The only thing obligating you is your enormous ego. You need to feel relevant, to feel like you're on the right side of history. You need the applause, the back-patting from your Hollywood friends. This isn't about the environment, Colin. This is about you. This is about your need to be seen as one of the good ones. The two men were half out of their seats now, the desk between them feeling woefully insufficient to contain the raw hostility radiating from both sides. The audience was frozen, some people's mouths literally hanging open in shock at what they were witnessing. Firth's voice shook with barely controlled rage. You arrogant prick, you absolute prick. You sit here every single night, attacking people, mocking anyone who gives a damn about anything beyond themselves, ridiculing anyone who tries to make the world slightly better, and you have the audacity to question my motives? You have the nerve to act like you're some kind of truth-teller? You're a professional cynic who's made millions by tearing others down. That's your entire business model. And you're a professional pretender, Morgan shot back, now fully standing behind his desk. That's what actors are. An actor who's forgotten where the performance ends and reality begins. You want to save the world? Start by being honest about who you are. You're not a scientist. You're not an expert. You're not an activist. You're a millionaire who made a vanity project and now expects everyone to applaud your noble sacrifice. Firth stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor with a sound that made everyone in the studio jump. I came here in good faith. I actually thought, despite everything I know about you, despite all the evidence, that we could have a real conversation about something that actually matters. Something bigger than your petty grievances and need for confrontation. But you're not interested in conversation, are you? You're interested in humiliation and conflict because that's all you know how to do. That's the only tool in your box. Morgan stood as well, pointing an accusatory finger across the desk like a weapon. Don't you dare act like the victim here. Don't you dare try to take the moral high ground. You came on this show knowing exactly what it is. You've watched it before. You knew what you were walking into. You wanted the platform, the publicity for your little documentary, the chance to reach millions of viewers. But you can't handle it when someone doesn't kiss your ass and tell you how wonderful and important you are. Kiss my ass? Firth's laugh was sharp and bitter, like breaking glass. Piers, I wouldn't expect you to engage honestly with the actual content if your life depended on it. You're so committed to being the contrarian, the provocateur, the devil's advocate, that you've completely lost the ability to have a genuine thought. Everything is performance with you. Everything is calculated. Everything is about winning the moment, getting the viral clip, manufacturing outrage for ratings. The audience was completely transfixed now, some looking genuinely concerned about where this was heading. Production staff at the edges of the set had moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. Morgan's face was crimson now, his voice rising to a shout. You don't get to come on my show and psychoanalyze me. You're not that smart, Colin. You're just another privileged actor who thinks playing dress-up for a living gives you insight into the real world. And you're a bully, Firth said, his voice suddenly quiet but seething with contempt. You've always been a bully. You pick targets you think are soft, you attack them relentlessly, and when they fight back, you play the victim. It's pathetic. You're pathetic. Morgan's eyes went wide with fury. Get the hell off my show. Gladly, Firth said, already reaching up to remove his microphone. His hands were shaking with anger as he fumbled with the clip. This has been a complete waste of time. I should have known better than to expect anything resembling intellectual honesty from you. Intellectual honesty? Morgan was practically screaming now. You don't know the meaning of the phrase. You live in a fantasy world where your privilege doesn't count because you feel bad about it, where your choices don't matter because your intentions are pure. That's not honesty. That's delusion. Firth ripped the microphone pack from his belt and slammed it on the desk with enough force to make everyone in the studio jump. You know what, Piers? I actually feel sorry for you. You're so consumed with being provocative that you've forgotten how to be human. Everything is a fight. Everything is a debate to be won. When was the last time you actually listened to someone? When was the last time you changed your mind about anything? I don't need to change my mind when I'm right, Morgan snapped back. And I'm right about you. You're a fraud. A well-spoken, Oscar-winning fraud. But a fraud nonetheless. Right about everything, as always, Firth said, shaking his head in disgust. That must be exhausting. Or maybe it's just lonely. Is that what this is, Piers? Is this constant aggression just because you're desperate for any kind of genuine connection, even if it's conflict? Morgan's voice dropped to something cold and cutting. Don't project your Hollywood therapy sessions onto me. You want to talk about lonely? You're the one who has to. Make a documentary to feel like your life has meaning. You're the one who needs validation from strangers because your work isn't enough anymore. Firth grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, his movements sharp and aggressive. He was shrugging it on as he spoke, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. This conversation is over. I'm done being your punching bag for the night. I'm done being the target of your manufactured outrage. I hope the ratings were worth it, Piers. I hope this clip goes viral. I hope you get everything you wanted out of this. Oh, they will be, Morgan said with a nasty smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is exactly what people tune in for. This is what gets millions of views. They want to see celebrities like you exposed for what you really are. Thin-skinned, self-righteous hypocrites who can dish it out but absolutely cannot take it when someone pushes back. You really believe that, don't you? Firth paused, his jacket halfway on, looking at Morgan with something between pity and pure disgust. You actually think this is journalism, this ambush entertainment, this manufactured outrage, this theatrical aggression. You think you're speaking truth to power, holding the mighty accountable, but you're just noise, Piers. You're just another source of meaningless noise in a world that's already drowning in it. You contribute nothing of value. Morgan leaned across his desk, his voice dripping with venom and contempt. And you're just another actor who thinks the world gives a damn about your opinions on complex issues you don't understand. Newsflash, nobody cares. They watch your movies, they enjoy your performances, and then they forget about you the moment they leave the cinema. This documentary of yours will disappear without a trace, just like all the other celebrity vanity projects that came before it. Just like Bono's poverty crusade, just like Leonardo DiCaprio's climate warnings, people don't care what actors think. At least I'm trying to do something positive, Firth said, shrugging on his jacket fully now, adjusting it with sharp, angry movements. At least I'm attempting to use whatever platform I have for something constructive. What's your legacy going to be, Piers? Seriously, what do you want to be remembered for? Making people angry? Making them feel cynical and distrustful about everything? Tearing down anyone who tries to make a difference? Is that really what you want written on your gravestone? I want to be remembered for not being a coward, Morgan said, his voice rising again. For not hiding behind noble causes and documentary films, because I'm too scared to admit that I'm just a person with no special insight into anything. For not pretending that my wealth and privilege somehow give me the right to lecture others about how they should live. For having the courage to call out nonsense when I see it, regardless of who's peddling it. Firth laughed, a sound of pure disbelief that echoed through the silent studio. You're calling me a coward? You, who attacks from behind a desk every single night? Who never has to face real consequences for anything you say? Who can lob grenades and then retreat into your comfortable life? That's rich. That's genuinely rich. You want to talk about courage? Courage would be admitting when you're wrong. Courage would be having a conversation instead of a confrontation. Courage would be listening instead of just waiting for your turn to attack. The tension was so thick now that several audience members looked like they genuinely wanted to leave, but were too afraid to move, too afraid to miss what might happen next. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but nobody wanted to make that call. This was television gold, even if it was uncomfortable to watch. "Get out," Morgan said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Seriously, get the hell out of my studio right now." "Oh, I'm leaving," Firth said, already walking toward the edge of the set, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "But let me tell you something before I go, because I think you need to hear this. This right here, this aggressive, combative, nothing is sacred approach you've built your entire career on, it's not brave. It's not honest. It's not even entertaining anymore. It's just sad. It's a sad little man who can only feel big by making others feel small." Morgan was on his feet now, moving around his desk, shouting at Firth's back with genuine fury. "You're just upset because someone finally called you out on your bullshit. You can't handle being challenged. You can't handle someone not falling at your feet and praising your moral courage. You're a fraud, and everyone watching this can see it." Firth spun around one last time, his face flushed with anger. "Challenged? Is that what you think this was? This wasn't a challenge, Piers. This was a circus. You don't challenge people. You perform for them. You don't seek truth. You seek conflict. And the worst part? You've convinced yourself that makes you some kind of warrior for honesty when really, you're just a man who's profoundly uncomfortable with nuance." "Nuance?" Morgan shouted. "You want nuance? Here's some nuance for you. You're a has-been actor who's desperate to stay relevant by jumping on every fashionable cause that comes along. Climate change, social justice, whatever gets you attention. You're not principled, you're opportunistic." Firth's voice dropped to something dangerous and controlled. "And you're a man who's built an entire career on other people's pain and controversy. You're a parasite, Piers. You feed on drama and division because you have nothing real to offer. No actual ideas, no solutions, just endless criticism and mockery." The two men stared at each other across the studio, the air practically crackling with hostility. For a moment, it seemed like things might escalate even further, but then Firth shook his head slowly, as if coming to a final decision. "I'm done," he said quietly. "This is pointless. You can't reason with someone who thinks aggression is the same as honesty." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the now silent studio. Morgan, still standing behind his desk, called out one last time, "Run away, Colin. That's what people like you do when you can't win the argument. Firth didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the comment. He just kept walking, his back rigid with anger and dignity. As he reached the studio doors, he paused for just a moment, hand on the handle, as if considering whether to deliver one final response. But then he pushed through and disappeared into the hallway beyond, leaving Morgan standing alone on his set, chest heaving, face still flushed with rage. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in shock at what they'd just witnessed. Morgan slowly sat back down, straightening his papers with shaking hands, trying to regain his composure. But there was no denying what had just happened. What was supposed to be a promotional interview had exploded into one of the most intense confrontations in talk show history, ending with one of Britain's most respected actors walking off the set in disgust. The bridge between these two men burned beyond any hope of repair.